So the Samsung Galaxy S7 is one of those devices that came out many years ago, and it's actually apparently turning 6 years old this year, which is very interesting. And it's so funny because this was one of the last Samsung devices from their Galaxy series that had that home button. And when you look at this phone now, it's almost synonymous of looking at something like an iPhone 8 because of that home button design. But there are still so many features of this specific Samsung phone that I am still surprised how premium of a device this thing still is so many years into its life cycle. Now, I really wouldn't recommend anybody using this phone anymore unless you were to custom ROM it, but even then I probably wouldn't recommend it just because of the security vulnerabilities and everything related to that. But I will tell you, when I feel this phone in the hand, I am surprised how great of a feeling phone this thing still is in 2022. Now, if you want to pick up some phones I would recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside, the Samsung Galaxy S7 had a beautiful 1440p 5.1-inch Super AMOLED display. And as I mentioned before, this is a very good panel. It's a flat panel, but there's nothing wrong with that. It looks extremely beautiful. There's no 120 Hz or anything. Back in 2016, that was pretty hard to find. But this is still a very good looking panel for sure. It just so happens that it has a bunch of bezel around it, which isn't the best thing to look at, but it's still a very good looking panel. And like I mentioned, there's really not that much to complain about. You had the capacitive buttons on the front, you had the home button, and that really pretty much covers it up for the front side. Now, in terms of the rest of the body, the bottom we had the micro USB port. This was one of the last Samsung Galaxy S series devices to have that micro USB port as well. We had a headphone jack and we had a micro SD card slot. Eventually with the Galaxy S8, we did have the USB-C port, which was cool, but this phone still had a headphone jack and a micro SD card slot as well, which is something we really don't see too often anymore. Now on the back, we had the glass back on this device, which still looks really good like I mentioned. You had a wireless charging as well, which was really cool, and you kind of had like this curved back on the back, which was kind of interesting. The sides of it were curved, which I actually kind of liked. It kind of made it feel a little bit cooler in the hand versus like just having it a flat back. So I would definitely say this phone still feels way more premium than it should, and you can probably pick these things up for like $50 in so many places, and I'm still surprised how premium feeling this specific phone is still in 2022. Now, speaking about the camera setup, this device has a single 12 megapixel wide angle lens on the back. It also has a 5 megapixel wide angle lens on the front. Now you can actually do 1440p video on the front, which is pretty interesting, and you can also do 4K at 30 frames per second on the back of the Samsung Galaxy S7 as well, which is another really cool thing. This phone came out in 2016, so a lot of phones by that point could already do 4K, which I was really happy about. Now on top of that, with the Samsung Galaxy S7, what's really crazy about this specific camera is the amount of features that is built into this specific UI. So when you actually have something like, this Samsung experience software that this thing had, I wasn't a big fan of it. I was not a big fan of it at all. But the one thing is for sure, Samsung packs a bunch of features into their cameras. And the thing about the Samsung Galaxy S7's camera UI is that there's still a lot of features built in that you can see on the screen. So although I wouldn't use it, and although I probably won't recommend using it in 2022, this camera quality is still pretty impressive for being as old as it is. Now, if this camera were to come out on the latest Samsung Galaxy phone, I would be upset because, it's lacking a bunch of things, such as 4K at 60 and no 8K video that we have now, no 4K at 60 on the front, the fact that it only has a single camera lens, no telephoto lens or ultra-wide sensor. But I would still say, for it being as old as it is, I'm still pretty surprised how good of a camera this thing still has in 2022. So in terms of the camera setup, that covers it up there. Now in terms of the longevity aspect, like I mentioned, this thing is pretty much outdated. It's not getting any more software updates, and as of this point, it's really not worth it just because of the security vulnerabilities. Now the Galaxy S7 did get a couple of updates here and there, which was actually pretty crazy. I was not expecting it to be. I think the last 2 years it got like maybe 1 or 2 updates. The Galaxy S8 just got another update, but even at that point, it's really not worth it. You're getting a very slow phone. You're getting a phone that just doesn't have as many features, and although the price tag and although the feeling of it in the hand feels way more premium than it should, the internals are always going to be consistent, and they're fairly outdated for the most part. You can definitely feel you're using a 6-year-old phone for sure. However, I think you may be able to custom ROM some of these versions of these, Galaxy S7s, and if you were to do that, I would love to hear your experience on it. I tried to do it last year, but some of my Galaxy S7s could not install the ROM. I was able to do it for a Galaxy S6 and an S5. Unfortunately, the S7 did not work out, so that pretty much covers it up there. Now, in terms of the performance side of things, this device, some of the models had that Exynos 8890 octa chipset and octa-core CPU, with 4 gigabytes of RAM on each of those models. Now, what I'll tell you about the performance side is I think the Galaxy S7 is a pretty slow and glitchy performing device, especially now in 2022. And one of the main reasons for this is the gesture-based design. You do have to remember that the latest Samsungs, the latest iPhones, they all use that newer gesture-based design. There is no home button anymore on these iPhones. And there's something about clicking on that home button that really makes me feel like I'm using a very archaic phone. And that's not trying to be a diss for the Galaxy S7, but that is something to keep in mind. If you're still using this phone and you're not expecting the best performance, well, you do have to keep in mind that you're kind of limiting yourself. Even like the latest budget phones, like the Pixel 4a, even like the Galaxy A series, the cheapest Galaxy A series, may give you better performance than this thing nowadays. On top of that, if you're doing light tasks, if you're just calling people and texting people and browsing the internet, this thing is probably more than enough for you. I mean, you probably won't need too much to do that kind of stuff, but if you are trying to do heavier intensive games, heavier intensive apps, and you're trying to even go on like Snapchat and Instagram and have a good experience with it, this is not going to be a great performing phone for you. You're really going to have some, glitchy performance, and it's just not a smooth performing phone anymore. Even when these apps are loaded, it's still a glitchy experience. If you don't really mind the, opening and closing apps and it being a glitchy experience and all that stuff like I mentioned before, then I guess you might be able to get through with this. But in 2016, this was probably the fastest phone or one of the fastest phones of that year, but now it really isn't, and I would definitely avoid trying to use this phone in 2022. So in terms of the performance, that covers it up there. Now ending it off with the battery life, this phone actually had a 3000 mAh battery inside of it, which was actually a pretty decent sized battery for sure. It also had wireless charging, which is always good to see. And, I think this phone is, a decent sized battery at that time. Funny enough, most of the iPhones, like the iPhone 13s, the iPhone 12s, have around a 3000 mAh battery too. So I'm surprised we haven't seen bigger batteries on these devices, but still a very decent sized battery for a 2016 phone. And I do remember hearing a lot about the Galaxy S7's battery life back in 2016, and it was a very good battery life as well. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. And to be completely honest, I think the Samsung Galaxy S7 is not worth it in 2022 anymore. I think it's a phone that probably meant a lot at one point in 2016. It may have been the best phone of that year, but now it's definitely showing its age. I mean, the beautiful panel is extremely good looking on the front. It is 1440p and it still looks beautiful. The home button and the bezels and everything definitely do age it a little bit, but it's still a good looking phone for sure. You have the headphone jack and a micro SD card slot, which is always something so beautiful to see on these devices. The glass back with wireless charging is really cool. The camera quality isn't even that bad, which is actually pretty interesting. You have IP certification, and it's a really decent phone for what it is. However, the internals are the biggest problem. It's a pretty slow phone, and because of that, it's just not really worth it like that. If you were to pick up this phone for someone who barely knows how to use a phone, then this may not be a bad idea. But if you're trying to get the best experience, you can probably do a lot more for maybe $50 more than this phone. A Galaxy A series, like a A52 or something, maybe a better choice than this. Some of the oldest Pixels, maybe like the first Pixel that came out the same year as this one, that may be worth it more than this thing. So that pretty much covers it up there. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly, everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.